The scent of salt and rust filled the darkness, and Rosalie Harper pressed herself deeper into the corner of the wooden crate, trying not to breathe too loudly as footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the metal walls of the shipping container. 3 days since she'd slipped away from the locked room in the warehouse. 3 days of moving from shadow to shadow through the dockyard until she'd found this container already half loaded with cargo, and she'd climbed inside what she thought was an empty crate only to discover it filled with straw packing material. Good enough. Better than the alternative. Better than the buyers who'd paid for her like she was a piece of furniture, who'd discussed her hair color and build as though she couldn't hear every word. The footsteps stopped. Rosalie held her breath, counting seconds in her head. 30, 40. The container had been loaded onto something. She'd felt the lurch and sway of movement hours ago, but then everything had gone still. Maybe a truck. Maybe a ship. She had no idea where she was going, only that it had to be away from the men who'd taken her outside a grocery store in Seattle 2 weeks ago. Away from the cold room where she'd been kept with 4 other women, away from the man with the clipboard who'd inspected them like livestock. Metal groaned. The container door was opening. Voices drifted in, speaking a language she didn't recognize. Eastern European, maybe. Rosalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd wedged herself into the crate and pulled the lid down as far as it would go without latching, leaving just enough gap for air. If they were just checking the shipment, if they didn't actually open anything, maybe they wouldn't find her. The voices grew closer. She heard the sound of wood scraping on metal, crates being shifted. Then the lid of her crate was pried open and pale light flooded in. Rosalie looked up, blinking, into the face of the most beautiful and terrifying man she'd ever seen. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in dark clothes that looked expensive even in the dim light. His skin was alabaster white, smooth and perfect, and his hair fell past his shoulders in a cascade of pure white that seemed to shimmer. His eyes were a deep crimson, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Everything about him was sharp, elegant, ancient in a way she couldn't articulate. He looked down at her crouched in the straw, and his expression didn't change. "Mine now," he said flatly. Rosalie's stomach dropped. Another buyer. Of course. She'd jumped from one trafficking operation directly into another one's shipment. The universe had a sick sense of humor. "No," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice came out. "I'm nobody's." One pale eyebrow rose slightly. The man tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. Around him, other figures moved, all of them with the same white hair and pale skin, though none as striking as the man staring down at her. They were opening other crates, checking contents, speaking in low voices. "You are in my cargo," the man said. His voice was deep, accentless, perfectly calm. "Stolen from my warehouse 3 nights ago by humans foolish enough to think I wouldn't notice. Therefore, you are mine. The logic is simple." "I'm not cargo," Rosalie said. She pushed herself up to her knees, even though every instinct screamed at her to stay small, stay quiet, stay unnoticed. "I escaped from traffickers. I didn't know whose container this was. I just needed to hide." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. For a long moment, he said nothing, just watched her with that unsettling crimson gaze. Then he reached down, offering his hand. Rosalie stared at it. Long fingers, pale as marble. She didn't take it. "If you're here," the man said, "the traffickers were stealing from me to transport you. That makes you part of the debt they owe. I am Valdis Voronov. You're in my territory, in my container, in my city. Come out of the box." Not a request. But he hadn't grabbed her, hadn't forced her. Rosalie's mind raced. She could refuse, could try to run, but she was surrounded by what she was increasingly certain were not humans. The way they moved was too smooth, too quick, the way their eyes reflected the light. And this Valdis Voronov, whoever he was, radiated power like heat from a fire. She ignored his hand and climbed out of the crate herself, stumbling slightly when her feet hit the metal floor of the container. Her legs had gone numb from crouching. She was wearing jeans and a thin sweater, dirty now and torn at one sleeve. Her dark hair had come loose from its ponytail and hung around her face in tangles. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a desperate woman who'd been running for days. Valdis let his hand drop. He stood at least a foot taller than her, and up close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his features. No pores, no imperfections, just smooth white skin and those burning red eyes. "What are you?" Rosalie asked. "The king," Valdis said simply, "of this city's night court. Every vampire in Seattle answers to me, and every criminal enterprise that touches the night trade does as well, or should. These traffickers made a mistake." Vampire. The word settled over Rosalie like ice water. She'd heard stories, everyone had, whispered rumors about the pale ones who controlled the cities after dark, who bought and sold and ruled from shadows. Most people thought it was organized crime with a gothic aesthetic. Rosalie had never given it much thought. She'd been too busy working 2 jobs to pay off her student loans, too busy living her normal human life, until the van had pulled up beside her and someone had grabbed her from behind. "So what now?" Rosalie asked. She couldn't run. She was surrounded. And some part of her, the part that had kept her alive this long, told her that if this vampire king had wanted to hurt her, he already would have. "You said I'm yours because I was in your stolen cargo. What does that mean?" Valdis regarded her for a long moment. Around them, his people had finished inspecting the other crates and were waiting silently. "It means," he said finally, "that the traffickers owe me a debt, and you are part of that accounting. But I am not them. Come, we're not conducting this conversation in a shipping container." He turned and walked toward the open container door without looking back, clearly expecting her to follow. Rosalie's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct said not to go with him, not to trust anyone, not after what she'd been through. But what choice did she have? She was in a shipyard surrounded by vampires, with no money, no phone, no idea even what day it was. She followed. Outside the container, night had fallen, deep and complete. The shipyard stretched around them in shadows and amber lights, massive cranes rising against the cloudy sky. A black car waited nearby, sleek and expensive. Valdis moved toward it, and Rosalie followed, her heart pounding. One of the other vampires opened the rear door. Valdis gestured for her to get in. "Where are you taking me?" Rosalie asked, not moving. "My estate," Valdis said. "You need food, rest, and clothes that don't smell like 3 days of hiding. After that, we'll discuss the situation." "I could just leave," Rosalie said. "Walk away right now." Valdis looked at her, and something flickered in his expression. "You could try. But the traffickers who took you are still operating. They know you escaped. They'll be looking for you, and they have resources. If you run, you'll last perhaps a day before they find you again, or before something else does. Seattle's night is more dangerous than you know." Rosalie wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could manage on her own, but she knew he was right. She had nothing. No weapons, no safe place to go, no way to fight back against an organization that had already taken her once. She looked at Valdis, trying to read his face, but it was like staring at a marble statue, beautiful and cold and utterly unreadable. "And if I go with you?" she asked. "You eat, you sleep. Tomorrow we talk and you decide what happens next. I am not your captor." His voice was flat, factual. "But I will not leave you in the street to be taken again. The efficiency offends me." It was such a strange way to phrase it that Rosalie almost laughed. The efficiency offends me. Not the morality, not the horror of human trafficking, the inefficiency. But something in his eyes told her he meant more than he was saying. Or maybe she was projecting, hoping for humanity in something clearly inhuman. She got in the car. Valdis slid in beside her, and one of his people took the driver's seat. The car pulled away from the shipyard smoothly, moving through the industrial district toward the city lights. Rosalie sat rigid, pressed against the door, watching Valdis from the corner of her eye. He didn't look at her, just stared out the window at the passing streets. "Why do you care?" Rosalie asked finally. "About the traffickers, I mean. If you're a vampire king, don't you have bigger problems?" Valdis turned his head slightly toward her. Human trafficking on my territory without my knowledge means someone is operating outside my authority. That's a problem. The fact that they stole my cargo to do it compounds the insult. And I dislike slavers on principle. They create chaos and draw unwanted attention. So it's about control, Rosalie said. Everything is about control, Valdis replied. I maintain order in this city's night. That means no one takes humans by force, no one trades in slaves, no one creates messes I have to clean up. The traffickers broke all those rules. They'll answer for it. Rosalie studied him. His profile was sharp, elegant, like something carved from ice. And me? I'm just leverage in whatever you're planning? You're a witness, Valdis said. You can identify the traffickers, their location, their operation. That's valuable. What happens to you after depends on what you want. I want to go home, Rosalie said quietly. Valdis finally turned to look at her fully, and those red eyes were intense in the darkness of the car. Where is home? An apartment in Capitol Hill. Except I can't pay rent without my job, which I've probably been fired from by now, and I don't have my keys or my phone or anything, so I guess home is theoretical at this point. We'll retrieve your belongings, Valdis said. After the rest. First, you recover. The car wound through Seattle's streets, heading east, and Rosalie watched the city pass by. Normal people going about their normal lives, completely unaware of the vampires moving among them. She'd been one of those people 2 weeks ago. Now she was sitting next to a vampire king in the back of a luxury car, and nothing felt real. The estate, when they arrived, was not what Rosalie had expected. It was built into the hillside, a sprawling structure of glass and dark stone that looked ultra-modern from the outside but had an old-world weight to it. Gates opened automatically as they approached, and the car pulled into an underground garage that could have held 20 vehicles. Valdis got out and waited for Rosalie to follow. Inside, the estate was even more impressive. High ceilings, minimalist furniture in dark wood and leather, artwork on the walls that looked like it belonged in museums. Everything was immaculate, elegant, and somehow cold despite the obvious luxury. Valdis led her through halls lit by recessed lighting, past rooms she barely had time to glimpse, until they reached a bedroom suite that was larger than her entire apartment. You'll stay here, Valdis said, pushing open the door. There's a bathroom through that door. Clothes in the closet that should fit. One of my staff will bring you food. Eat, clean up, rest. The door locks from the inside. I'll come for you tomorrow evening. Rosalie stepped into the room slowly, taking it in. A massive bed with dark gray linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city lights. A sitting area with a couch and chairs. It was beautiful, and she didn't trust any of it. She turned to face Valdis, who stood in the doorway watching her. Why are you being nice to me? I'm not being nice, Valdis said. I'm being practical. You're no use to me exhausted and traumatized. Rest improves efficiency. There was that word again. Efficiency. But his eyes, Rosalie thought, told a different story. There was something there. Something almost like concern. Though it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. Thank you, she said, because she didn't know what else to say. Valdis inclined his head slightly, then turned and left, pulling the door shut behind him. Rosalie stood frozen for a moment, then walked over and tested the lock. It worked. The door locked from the inside, just like he'd said. She could lock him out if she wanted. She locked it. Then she walked to the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked terrible. Bruises on her face from where she'd been grabbed, dirt smudged across her cheek, her hair a disaster. Her eyes looked hollow, scared. She barely recognized herself. Rosalie turned on the shower and stood under the hot water until her skin turned pink and the bathroom filled with steam. She washed away the grime and the fear and the horror of the last 2 weeks, scrubbed until she felt raw and clean. Then she dried off and found, as promised, clothes in the closet. Soft things in her size, comfortable pants and shirts and even pajamas. She pulled on a pair of sleep pants and a tank top and padded back into the bedroom just as someone knocked on the door. She opened it a crack. A young woman with white hair and pale skin stood there holding a tray. Another vampire, Rosalie assumed. Lord Valdis sent food, the woman said, her voice soft. She didn't smile, but she didn't look threatening either. just neutral. Rosalie opened the door wider and took the tray. "Thank you." The woman nodded and left. Rosalie locked the door again and carried the tray to the small table by the window. Food. Real food. Soup, bread, fruit, cheese, a pot of tea. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and she ate slowly, carefully, trying not to make herself sick. It was the first real meal she'd had since being taken. The traffickers had fed them, but barely, enough to keep them alive, nothing more. When she finished eating, Rosalie stood at the window and looked out over Seattle. The city glittered below, peaceful and bright. Somewhere out there, the men who'd taken her were still operating, still taking women, still selling them. And she was here, in a vampire's estate, supposedly safe. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But she was exhausted, her body aching and her mind fuzzy with fatigue. Rosalie crawled into the enormous bed and pulled the covers up, expecting to lie awake for hours. Instead, she fell asleep within minutes, dropping into darkness like a stone. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and sat up in confusion before remembering where she was. The clock on the nightstand read 2 in the afternoon. She'd slept for almost 12 hours. Rosalie got up and found more food waiting on a tray by the door. Someone must have brought it while she slept. She ate, then explored the room more thoroughly. Everything was high quality, expensive, carefully chosen. The closet had a whole wardrobe in her size, from casual clothes to formal dresses. It should have been creepy, but mostly it just felt surreal. She spent the day in the room, not sure if she was allowed to leave, not sure she wanted to. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple, Rosalie changed into jeans and a sweater from the closet and waited. Right at sunset, there was a knock on the door. Rosalie opened it to find Valdis standing there, looking exactly as he had the night before. Perfect white hair, perfect pale skin, dressed in dark clothes that probably cost more than she made in a month. His red eyes met hers. "Did you rest?" he asked. "Yes," Rosalie said. "Thank you." "Good. Come with me. We need to talk." She followed him through the estate to a study lined with books, a fire burning in a modern fireplace. Valdis gestured to a chair, and Rosalie sat. He remained standing, positioned near the window where the last light of sunset cast him in silhouette. "Tell me everything," Valdis said. "From the beginning. How you were taken, where you were kept, what you saw and heard. Every detail." Rosalie took a breath and started talking. She told him about leaving the grocery store, about the van and the men with accents she couldn't place, about the warehouse on the waterfront where they'd kept her and the other women locked in a cold room with a single bare bulb, about the buyers who'd come to inspect them, the way they'd been discussed like objects, about the man with the clipboard who'd seemed to be in charge, a thin man with graying hair who spoke in rapid-fire Russian on his phone. She told him about overhearing the guards talking about a shipment, about how she'd slipped out when they'd opened the door to bring food, how she'd run through the warehouse and out into the dockyard, about hiding for 3 days, moving between containers and equipment, until she'd found the one she thought was empty. Valdis listened without interrupting, his face expressionless. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The warehouse," he said finally. "Describe the location." Rosalie did her best, explaining the waterfront, the other buildings nearby, the faded logo she'd seen on the side. Valdis nodded slowly. "I know the place," he said. "It was one of mine, sold 2 years ago to a shipping company. Apparently that was a front. The traffickers have been using my own former property to stage their operation." His voice didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold and hard. "That's bold." "So what now?" Rosalie asked. "You said I'm a witness. What does that mean?" Valdis turned to face her fully. "It means you can identify the men who took you, the location they used, the operation structure. With that information, I can dismantle them completely. But I need your cooperation. And if I don't cooperate? If I just want to forget all this and go home?" "Then you go home," Valdis said simply. "I gave you my word. You're not a prisoner. But the traffickers will still be operating. And they'll still be taking women. And eventually, they'll make another mistake. And I'll find them anyway. It will simply take longer and put more humans at risk. Rosalie looked at him, trying to understand. Why do you care? Really? You said it's about control, but there's something else. I can tell. Valdis was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, 70 years ago, my sister was taken by slavers, human ones, trading vampires to be experimented on by collectors who wanted to unlock our immortality. I was younger then, not yet king, and I didn't have the resources to find her before they killed her. When I took the throne, I made a law. No slavery in my territory, human or vampire. Anyone who breaks it answers to me personally. The words were delivered in the same flat, emotionless tone he used for everything, but Rosalie heard the weight behind them. The old pain, carefully controlled. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. It was a long time ago, but I don't tolerate slavers. That's not principle. It's personal. Valdis moved away from the window, crossing to the desk and pulling out a map. If you help me, I'll end them. All of them. The men who took you, the buyers, the network they're part of. I'll make sure they never touch another woman. Rosalie stood and walked over to the desk, looking down at the map, Seattle's waterfront, marked with locations in red ink. And me? What happens to me after? You go home, if that's what you want. I'll make sure you're safe, that they can't find you. Or you stay here until you feel ready to leave. Your choice. It was the second time he'd said that. Your choice. Like he was trying to prove something, though Rosalie couldn't figure out what. She studied the map, then looked up at Valdis. His face was impassive, but his eyes, those strange red eyes, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Okay, she said. I'll help. Tell me what you need. Over the next 3 days, Rosalie worked with Valdis and his people to plan. She identified the warehouse on a map, described everyone she'd seen, drew layouts of the rooms she'd been kept in. Valdis brought in other vampires, men and women with white hair and pale skin, who listened carefully and took notes. He introduced them as his court, his inner circle. They treated her with cautious respect, as though they weren't sure what to make of a human working alongside their king. Valdis himself was a constant presence. He asked detailed questions, pushing her to remember things she'd tried to forget. But he never pressured her, never made her feel rushed. When she needed to stop, to step away from the memories, he let her without comment, and between the planning sessions, he kept his distance, giving her space in the vast estate. Rosalie found herself wandering the halls during the day, when the vampires slept. The estate was enormous, full of rooms she explored cautiously, a library with thousands of books in languages she couldn't read, an art gallery with paintings that had to be priceless, a conservatory filled with night-blooming plants that filled the air with strange, sweet scents. Everything was beautiful and cold and meticulously maintained. She found Valdis's bedroom by accident on the second day, the door left slightly open. She'd glanced inside and seen a space even more minimalist than her guest room. A bed with black sheets, a single chair, nothing else. No personal items, no decoration, nothing to suggest who lived there. It was like a cell, voluntary and stark. That night, when Valdis came to continue their planning, Rosalie couldn't help asking, "Do you like living like this? Everything so empty and controlled?" Valdis looked up from the map they'd been marking. Like what? Like a museum. Beautiful but cold. No mess, no personality. Don't you ever want things to be less perfect? Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. Perfection is efficient. Disorder creates vulnerabilities. Disorder is human, Rosalie said. It's what makes life interesting. I'm not human, Valdis replied, but his tone wasn't sharp, just factual. No, but you were once, right? All vampires were human first. 300 years ago, Valdis said. I barely remember it. Rosalie studied him, this strange, ancient creature who looked no older than 30. Do you miss it, being human? Valdis set down the pen he'd been holding and looked at her directly. No. Humanity is fragile, brief, full of pain and weakness. I don't miss that. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to feel things the way humans do, intensely and without calculation. You don't seem to analyze your emotions before experiencing them. Would that be so bad? Rosalie asked, feeling without analyzing. It would be inefficient, Valdis said, and Rosalie couldn't tell if he was being serious or if that was vampire humor. She found herself thinking about that conversation later, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. Valdis was so controlled, so careful with every word and movement. But sometimes when he looked at her, she saw something underneath the marble mask, something almost warm. Or maybe she was imagining it, projecting her need to find humanity in her only ally. On the fourth night, Valdis told her they were ready to move. His people had confirmed the warehouse was still in use, had identified several of the traffickers coming and going. They had a plan to raid it, to take everyone involved and shut down the operation completely. What about the buyers? Rosalie asked. The ones who came to look at us? We have identities for 3 of them, Valdis said, including a vampire named Casimir Dragan, a minor noble who's been operating outside my authority for years. He's been untouchable because of his family connections, but trafficking humans gives me grounds to move against him directly. A vampire was buying humans? Rosalie felt sick. Why? Blood slaves, Valdis said flatly, kept in private estates, fed on regularly. It's illegal in my territory, but profitable on the black market. Casimir has been running a network for decades, I've suspected, but never had proof. Your testimony changes that. Rosalie wrapped her arms around herself. So this is bigger than just the warehouse. Much bigger. The human traffickers are a symptom. Casimir is the disease. He's been using human criminals to acquire slaves, keeping his own hands clean. Taking him down ends the whole network. Valdis watched her carefully. But it means you'll need to testify before my court. Face him directly. I won't ask you to do that unless you're willing. Rosalie thought about the other women in that cold room, the girl who'd cried herself to sleep every night, the older woman who'd tried to comfort everyone, even though she was just as scared, the young mother who'd begged the guards to let her call her children. All of them were still there, still waiting to be sold. I'll do it, Rosalie said. When? Tomorrow night. We raid the warehouse first, free everyone being held, take the human traffickers into custody. Then we bring them and the evidence before my court and call Casimir to answer. It will be public, formal. He'll try to discredit you, to claim you're lying. You'll need to be strong. I can be strong, Rosalie said. I've made it this far. Valdis looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Yes, you have. More than most would have. You're remarkably resilient. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her, and Rosalie felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you. Rest tonight, Valdis said. Tomorrow will be difficult. But Rosalie couldn't rest. She lay in bed as the sun came up, watching the sky lighten, thinking about what was coming. Eventually, she gave up on sleep and got up, prowling the estate restlessly. She found her way to the conservatory and sat among the night-blooming flowers, breathing in their scent. That's where Valdis found her in the late afternoon just before sunset. She heard footsteps and turned to see him standing in the doorway, backlit by the fading light. He looked almost ethereal, his white hair and pale skin glowing. You should be resting, he said. Couldn't sleep, Rosalie replied. Too much in my head. Valdis walked into the conservatory, moving between the plants with unconscious grace. He stopped a few feet from where she sat on a stone bench. Fear is natural. What you're doing tonight takes courage. I'm terrified, Rosalie admitted. Not of the raid, of after, of having to stand in front of your court and talk about what happened, of facing that vampire who wanted to buy me. He won't touch you, Valdis said, and there was steel in his voice. You'll be under my protection. Anyone who harms you answers to me. That includes Casimir. Rosalie looked up at him. Why are you doing this? Really? And don't say efficiency. You could have just raided the warehouse, freed everyone, and been done. You didn't have to bring me here, keep me safe, let me help plan. You didn't have to care. Valdis was quiet, his red eyes fixed on her. The last rays of sunlight slanted through the glass ceiling, and he stood just outside their reach, careful not to let them touch his skin. When I found you in that crate, he said finally. You were terrified, but not broken. You told me no immediately. You didn't beg or plead, you just stated a fact. You weren't mine. Most humans in your position would have submitted out of fear. You didn't. That interested me. Interested you? Rosalie repeated. Made me want to ensure you stayed unbroken, Valdis said. You'd already been treated as property once. I wouldn't compound that by doing the same, so I gave you choices, proved you weren't a prisoner. And in doing so, I discovered that I enjoyed your presence. Your questions, your observations, the way you see the world. It's been a long time since I found someone interesting. Rosalie's heart was beating too fast. That sounds almost like you care. Perhaps I do, Valdis said softly. That's inefficient, but apparently inevitable. She stood up, closing the distance between them. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You keep saying things are inefficient, but you do them anyway. Why? Because you make me want to, Valdis said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something unguarded. You make me remember what it was like to want something beyond control and order. I told you I don't remember being human, but that's not entirely true. I remember what it felt like to want things I couldn't calculate. You remind me of that. Rosalie reached up, hesitated, then touched his face. His skin was cool under her palm, smooth as marble but not quite as hard. He went very still, his eyes locked on hers. I should be afraid of you, she said. You're a vampire king. You could kill me without thinking. But I'm not afraid. I feel safer with you than I've felt in weeks. You should be afraid, Valdis said. I'm dangerous, Rosalie. Even to you, especially to you. Because you make me feel things I haven't felt in centuries. And I don't know how to manage that. Maybe you're not supposed to manage it, Rosalie said. Maybe you're just supposed to feel it. Valdis raised his hand slowly and covered hers where it rested against his face. His fingers were long and cool, gentle despite the strength she could sense in them. If I feel it, he said quietly, I won't want to let you go, and you deserve to be free. You deserve to choose your life without a vampire king shadowing it. What if I want you there? Rosalie asked. The words came out before she could think about them, but she didn't take them back. Valdis closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there was something almost like pain in their red depths. Then I would count myself fortunate beyond measure. But ask me again after tonight, after you've seen what I am when I deal with enemies, after you've watched me be what I need to be, then decide if you still want this. He stepped back, releasing her hand, and the distance felt like a physical loss. It's time, he said. We move at full dark. The raid happened fast and precise. Rosalie rode in the car with Valdis and 6 of his vampires, speeding through Seattle's streets toward the waterfront. They parked 2 blocks away and moved on foot, silent as shadows. Rosalie stayed close to Valdis, her heart pounding. She'd been given a phone with a direct line to his people in case they got separated, but she didn't plan on leaving his side. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows dark. Valdis raised a hand and his people spread out, surrounding the building. Then he moved forward, and the front door simply opened at his approach, the lock breaking with a sound like a gunshot. Inside, chaos erupted. The traffickers tried to fight, but they were humans against vampires, and it wasn't even close to a fair fight. Valdis moved through them like a force of nature, too fast to track, and men went down screaming or unconscious. Rosalie followed in his wake, protected by 2 of his vampires, until they reached the cold room where she'd been kept. The door was locked. Valdis tore it off its hinges and tossed it aside like cardboard. The women inside screamed, huddling together. Rosalie pushed forward. It's okay, she called out. We're here to help. You're safe now. She recognized all of them. The young girl, the older woman, the mother, 2 others she'd barely spoken to. They stared at Rosalie, then at the vampires behind her, confused and terrified. I know how this looks, Rosalie said, but they're here to free you. The traffickers are done. You're going home. It took time to calm them, to get them moving. Valdis had people bring blankets and water, and they were led out to waiting vehicles. Rosalie stayed with them, reassuring them until they were safely on their way to a hospital where Valdis had doctors prepared to check them over. Only then did she return to where Valdis stood in the warehouse, surrounded by bound traffickers on their knees. She recognized the thin man with graying hair, the one who'd been in charge. He stared at Valdis with undisguised terror. "You stole from me," Valdis said to him, his voice conversational. "Used my property, my reputation, my territory to run your operation. That was foolish." "We didn't know," the man stammered in accented English. "We thought the warehouse was abandoned. We didn't know it was yours." "Ignorance isn't an excuse," Valdis said. "And you did know. You knew you were operating in Seattle, which means you were operating in my city. You knew the rules against trafficking here. You chose to break them anyway because you thought you could get away with it." "Please," the man said. "We were just suppliers. We have a contract with buyers, important buyers, vampire buyers. We were just doing business." "Casimir Dragan," Valdis said, and the man's face went gray. "Yes, I know. You're going to tell my court everything about your arrangement with him, every detail, every transaction, and then you're going to disappear into a human prison for the rest of your very short life." The raid had taken less than an hour. By the time they returned to Valdis's estate, it was just past midnight. The traffickers had been handed over to human authorities who worked with Valdis's people, provided with enough evidence to ensure convictions. The women had been taken to safety, and now came the hard part. The court convened at 1 a.m. in a massive hall beneath the estate that Rosalie hadn't known existed. It was carved from stone, ancient and vast, lit by modern lights that cast everything in sharp relief. Vampires filled the space, hundreds of them, all with white hair and pale skin, all watching as Valdis took his place on a throne-like chair at the far end. Rosalie stood to his right, positioned as a witness. She'd changed into formal clothes, a simple black dress that Valdis had provided, and she felt desperately out of place among the immortal beings surrounding her. But Valdis had told her to stay close, and she trusted him. The traffickers were brought in first, forced to kneel before the court. One by one, they confessed under Valdis's questioning, laying out the whole operation. The buyers they'd worked with, the money exchanged, the locations used, and over, the name Casimir Dragan. Then Casimir himself was summoned. He arrived with an entourage, a tall vampire with white hair streaked through with silver, his face aristocratic and cold. He wore expensive clothes and moved with the arrogance of someone who'd never had to answer to anyone. When he saw Rosalie, his eyes narrowed. "Lord Valdis," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "You called me here under urgent summons. I assume there's good reason to interrupt my evening." "There is," Valdis said. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Rosalie could sense the tension in him. "You're accused of trafficking humans in my territory, of operating a blood slave network in violation of my laws. How do you answer?" Casimir's expression didn't change. "I answer that this is absurd. I've done no such thing, and I resent the implication." "The humans you employed to acquire slaves have confessed," Valdis said. "They've provided detailed records of transactions, including payments made to you. They've identified you as their primary buyer." "Humans lie," Casimir said dismissively. "They'll say anything under duress. This is clearly a fabrication designed to damage my reputation." "And her?" Valdis gestured to Rosalie. "Is she fabricating as well?" Casimir looked at Rosalie, and his expression turned contemptuous. "I've never seen this human in my life." Rosalie felt anger flare in her chest. She stepped forward before she could think. "You came to the warehouse 5 days ago. You inspected us. You told the trafficker you'd take 2 of the younger ones, but you wanted them checked for diseases first. You spoke in Russian, but one of your people translated for the human traffickers. I heard every word," the court murmured. Casimir's eyes went cold. "A desperate human trying to play victim. She's lying to gain sympathy from you, Lord Valdis. It's transparent." "Describe him," Valdis said to Rosalie, his voice calm. Rosalie kept her eyes on Casimir as she spoke. Tall, white hair with silver through it, scar along his left jawline, barely visible, Ring on his right hand, gold with a red stone. He wore a long black coat with a fur collar, and he had 2 guards with him, both shorter, both armed. The court went quiet. Casimir's hand had moved unconsciously to his jaw, where a faint scar ran along the bone. His right hand bore the exact ring Rosalie had described. Coincidence, Casimir said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Many vampires match that description. Not with that ring, Valdis said softly. That's the dragon family seal. Only you wear it in this city, and the scar came from a duel 20 years ago with a vampire you killed for insulting your honor. Everyone here remembers, so either this human has impossibly detailed knowledge of you, or she's telling the truth about witnessing your crimes. Casimir's face twisted into fury. You're taking the word of a human over mine. I'm nobility, Valdis. I have rights. You had rights, Valdis said, and his voice dropped to something dark and dangerous. Until you broke my laws, until you turned humans into slaves in my city, until you created a network that undermines everything I've built here. Your nobility doesn't shield you from justice. He stood, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. Valdis moved down from his throne and crossed to where Casimir stood. The 2 vampires faced each other, and Rosalie could feel the power radiating from both of them, ancient, terrible power. You're finished, Valdis said quietly. Your assets are forfeit, your network dismantled, your people scattered. You're exiled from my territory. If you return, I'll execute you myself. Do you understand? Casimir's face was white with rage, but he must have seen something in Valdis's eyes because he stepped back. You're making a mistake. My family will not forget this. Your family is in Eastern Europe, Valdis said. This is my city. Here, I am the only authority that matters. Go, before I change my mind about letting you live. For a moment, Rosalie thought Casimir might attack. His hands clenched into fists, and his eyes blazed with fury. But then he turned sharply and strode from the hall, his entourage scrambling to follow. The court watched him go in silence. When he was gone, Valdis turned to address the assembled vampires. Let this be clear to everyone. Human trafficking is forbidden. Blood slavery is forbidden. Anyone who breaks these laws will face the same consequences. I don't care about your lineage or your connections. In Seattle, we don't trade in lives. We don't create victims. That ends now. The court murmured agreement, and Rosalie felt something loosen in her chest. It was done. Casimir was gone, the traffickers arrested, the women freed. She'd done what she came to do. Valdis returned to where she stood and looked down at her. You were brave, he said quietly, pitched only for her to hear. Thank you. I just told the truth, Rosalie said. Which took more courage than most possess. Valdis glanced at the court, then back to her. Come, you shouldn't have to stand here any longer. He led her out of the hall and back up into the estate, to the study where they'd planned the raid. The fire was burning low, casting warm light. Rosalie sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Valdis poured her a glass of water and handed it to her. What happens now? Rosalie asked. Casimir will leave the city. His network will collapse without him. The humans involved go to prison, and the women you were held with will be helped to rebuild their lives. I have resources set aside for situations like this. They'll have housing, counseling, job placement if they need it. They'll be taken care of. That's good, Rosalie said. She sipped the water, trying to process everything. And me? Valdis sat down across from her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. That depends on what you want. I told you before, you're free to leave. Go back to your apartment, your life. I'll make sure you're safe, that no one comes looking for you. Or? Rosalie prompted when he trailed off. Or you stay, Valdis said quietly, not as a prisoner or a debt, as a choice. I meant what I said before, Rosalie. You make me feel things I haven't felt in centuries. You make me want to be more than just efficient and controlled. And if you wanted to stay, if you wanted to see where this could go, I would welcome that. Rosalie set down her glass and looked at him. This strange, ancient vampire who'd found her hiding in a crate and declared her his, then spent days proving she wasn't. who'd been cold and controlled on the surface, but protective and gentle underneath, who'd dismantled an entire trafficking network because it offended his principles and hurt people he'd decided to care about. "I want to stay," she said, "but not hiding in your estate. I want to help. Those women who were freed, they're going to need support, someone who understands what they went through. I could do that. I could run a safe house or something, help them transition back to normal life." Valdis stared at her. "You want to work with trafficking survivors?" "I am a trafficking survivor," Rosalie said. "And I know what it's like to feel powerless, to have your choices stripped away. If I could help others get that back, that would mean something. That would matter." "It would also be dangerous," Valdis said. "Casimir's gone, but there are others. Other vampires who might try to restart the trade. Other humans who'll see an opportunity. You'd be making yourself a target." "Then you'll protect me," Rosalie said. "That's what you do, right? Protect your territory, and if I'm staying, I'm part of that." Something lit in Valdis's eyes, something warm and almost alive. "If you're staying, you're more than just my territory. You'd be mine in the only way that matters, by choice, and I would protect you with everything I have." Rosalie stood and crossed to him. He remained seated, which put them almost at eye level. She reached out and took his face in her hands, feeling the cool smoothness of his skin. "Then we have a deal. I help the survivors, you help me stay safe, and we see where this goes." "This will be complicated," Valdis said, but his hands came up to rest on her waist, holding her gently. "You're human. I'm not. You'll age. I won't. There are problems we'll have to navigate." "We'll figure it out," Rosalie said. "People figure out complicated relationships all the time, and you're 300 years old. Surely you've learned patience." "Not when it comes to you," Valdis said, and then he was kissing her. It was nothing like Rosalie had expected. She'd thought he might be cold, distant, but his mouth was warm against hers and he kissed her like she was precious, like he was afraid she might disappear. She melted into him, her hands sliding into his white hair, and he pulled her closer until she was practically in his lap. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Valdis rested his forehead against hers. "I haven't done this in a very long time," he admitted. "What, kiss someone?" Rosalie asked. "Care about someone," Valdis said. "Want someone to stay? It's terrifying." "Good terrifying or bad terrifying?" Rosalie asked. "Good," Valdis said. "Definitely good, if inefficient." Rosalie laughed, and the sound seemed to fill the room with warmth. "We're going to have to work on your obsession with efficiency. Perhaps you can teach me about productive disorder," Valdis said, and there was the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. Rosalie had never seen him smile before, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and more human. "I think I can do that," she said, and kissed him again. Over the following months, Rosalie's life changed in ways she never could have anticipated. She moved into Valdis's estate, not as a guest but as a partner, and slowly her presence began to change the place. She added color to the stark rooms, filled the spaces with things that mattered to her, books and plants and photographs of the women she helped. The estate became warmer, lived in, less like a museum and more like a home. With Valdis's resources and support, Rosalie opened a safe house for trafficking survivors. It was a large building in a quiet neighborhood, staffed with counselors and protected by Valdis's people. Women who'd been freed from various situations came there to recover, to learn skills, to rebuild their lives. Rosalie ran it with fierce dedication, drawing on her own experience to help others find their way back to autonomy. She stayed in touch with the women who'd been in the warehouse with her. They all recovered at different paces, but they recovered. The young girl went back to school. The mother was reunited with her children. The older woman started a support group. They all knew what Rosalie had done, how she'd testified, and they were grateful. Valdis, for his part, proved to be exactly what he'd promised: protective, supportive, and increasingly less controlled. Rosalie taught him to laugh, to enjoy moments without analyzing them, to exist in the present rather than always calculating the future. He was still a vampire king, still commanding and powerful, but with her, he softened. He let himself feel. The issue of her mortality hung over them, unspoken but always present. Rosalie was 26. Valdis was 318. Every year she aged was a year closer to losing her, and she could see the awareness of it in his eyes sometimes when he looked at her. It was 8 months after the raid when Rosalie finally brought it up. They were in the conservatory, her favorite place in the estate, surrounded by night-blooming flowers. Valdis had his arm around her shoulders, and they were watching the Seattle lights through the glass ceiling. "I've been thinking," Rosalie said carefully, "about the future, about us." Valdis tensed slightly. "What about us? You're immortal. I'm not. That's going to be a problem eventually." "I know," Valdis said quietly. "I try not to think about it. Every moment with you is precious because it's finite. But the idea of losing you is unbearable." Rosalie turned to face him. "What if you didn't have to lose me? What if I became like you?" Valdis went very still. "You're talking about being turned, becoming a vampire." "Yes," Rosalie said. "I've been researching it, talking to some of your people. I know it's possible, and I know it's permanent. But I also know that I don't want to leave you. I love you, Valdis. I want forever with you, if you'll have me." "Rosalie," Valdis said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Becoming a vampire means giving up the sun. It means blood and immortality, and living in the night forever. It means losing your humanity. I won't ask that of you. I can't." "You're not asking," Rosalie said. "I'm offering. I've thought about this carefully. The safe house runs well enough that others can take over day operations. I'd still be able to help just during the night. And yes, I'd miss the sun, but I'd have you. That's worth more." Valdis cupped her face in his hands, his red eyes intense. "You're certain? This isn't something you can undo. Once you're turned, you're changed forever." "I'm certain," Rosalie said. "I've never been more certain of anything. I want this. I want you. I want forever." Valdis kissed her, deep and desperate. When he pulled back, there were unshed tears in his eyes, though Rosalie had never thought vampires could cry. "Then I'll give you forever," he said. "If you're sure, if this is truly what you want, I'll turn you myself, and I'll spend eternity grateful for it." "When?" Rosalie asked. "Whenever you're ready," Valdis said. "There's no rush. Take time to settle your affairs. Say your goodbyes to the daylight world. When you're ready, tell me, and we'll do it." Rosalie thought about it for 3 more weeks, making sure, preparing. She told the staff at the safe house, arranged for others to cover the day shifts, made her peace with the idea of never seeing sunlight again. And then, on a clear night in early autumn, she told Valdis she was ready. He took her to his bedroom, that stark space she'd glimpsed once. It was just the two of them, private and quiet. Valdis explained the process carefully. He'd drink from her, take her to the edge of death, then feed her his blood. She'd die and be reborn as something new. It would hurt, he warned. The transformation was painful, but he'd be there through all of it. Rosalie lay down on his bed, her heart pounding. Valdis settled beside her, his face serious. "Last chance to change your mind," he said. "I'm not changing my mind," Rosalie said. "I love you. Do it." Valdis leaned down and kissed her throat, gentle and reverent. Then she felt his fangs pierce her skin, sharp pain followed by a strange warmth. He drank, and Rosalie felt her strength draining away, felt herself sliding toward darkness. Just when she thought she couldn't take any more, Valdis pulled back. His wrist was at her mouth, blood welling from a cut. "Drink," he said. Rosalie drank. The blood was strange, metallic and sweet and burning. It filled her mouth and throat, and she swallowed convulsively. Power rushed through her, foreign and electric, and then the pain hit. It felt like fire in her veins, like every cell in her body was being rewritten. Rosalie screamed, and Valdis held her, murmuring reassurances in a language she didn't understand. The pain went on, overwhelming, until finally, blessedly, she passed out. When she woke, everything was different. The room was brighter, every detail sharp and clear, even though the only light came from a single lamp. She could hear the estate around her, sounds she'd never noticed before. Her body felt strong, powerful, like she could move faster than thought, and she was so hungry. Valdis was sitting beside the bed, watching her. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Hungry," Rosalie said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "And different. Everything's different." "You're transitioning," Valdis said. "The hunger is normal. I have blood for you. And then we'll teach you how to manage your new abilities. It will take time, but I'll help you through it." He brought her a glass of blood, and Rosalie drank it without hesitation. It was exactly what she needed, satisfying the hunger in a way food never could have. When she finished, she looked at Valdis and saw him more clearly than ever before. The tiny variations in his expression, the way his eyes tracked her movements, the careful control he maintained over his own strength. "I can see you," she said. "Really see you. You're beautiful." "So are you," Valdis said softly. "Your eyes are red now. Your skin is paler, and you're going to be incredibly powerful. I can feel it." Over the next weeks, Rosalie learned to navigate her new existence. Valdis taught her to control her strength, to move with vampire speed, to sense the world around her in ways she never had as a human. She learned to avoid sunlight, to feed carefully and ethically from blood banks rather than humans, and she discovered that being a vampire didn't mean losing her humanity, it just meant expressing it differently. The safe house continued to thrive. Rosalie worked night shifts now, and found she could help even more than before. She could sense when someone was lying, could move quickly enough to intervene in crises, could protect the residents with strength that made her formidable. The women who came through learned that vampires weren't all predators, that some of them genuinely cared. And every night, Rosalie returned to the estate and to Valdis. They built a life together, no longer shadowed by the fear of her mortality. He taught her about vampire politics, about the court and the territory. She taught him about joy and spontaneity and what it meant to truly live rather than just exist. They balanced each other, and together they were stronger than either had been alone. 2 years after the raid, Rosalie stood in the safe house common room, watching a new arrival settle in. The woman was scared, traumatized, barely able to speak, but she was safe now. She'd been found by one of Valdis's people during a routine patrol and brought here, away from whoever had hurt her. Rosalie sat down beside her and spoke softly, reassuringly. "You're safe here. I know you're scared. I was too once. But this place is protected. No one will hurt you anymore. And when you're ready, we'll help you figure out what comes next. You're not alone." The woman looked at her with wide eyes. "You were like me?" "I was exactly like you," Rosalie said. "And I survived. More than survived. I found a new life, a better one. You can too. I promise." Later that night, Valdis met her at the safe house to walk home together. It was something they did often, moving through Seattle's dark streets like ghosts, talking about their respective days. Rosalie told him about the new arrival, and Valdis listened with the careful attention he gave everything she said. "You're changing the world," he said when she finished. "One person at a time. It's remarkable." "We're changing it," Rosalie corrected. "I couldn't do this without you, without your resources, your protection, your support." "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," Valdis said, "but I'm glad I get to be part of it, that I get to be part of your life." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Valdis said, "I've been thinking, the safe house is successful. We could expand, open others in different cities, create a network for survivors, something that spans my territory and beyond." Rosalie looked at him, surprised and delighted. "You'd do that?" "We'd do that," Valdis said. "Together, if you wanted to. I know how much this work means to you, and I want to support it however I can." Rosalie stopped walking and pulled him into a kiss right there on the street. When they broke apart, she said, "I love you. So much. Yes, let's do it. Let's build something that matters." "We already have," Valdis said, gesturing between them. "This. Us. That matters more than anything." They continued walking hand in hand through the city they both protected and loved. Above them, the stars were hidden by clouds, and the moon was just a sliver. But neither of them needed light to see. They had each other. And they had forever. Years passed. The network of safe houses grew. Rosalie became known in survivor communities as someone who understood, who helped, who never gave up on anyone. Valdis ruled his territory with the same careful control he'd always had, but with new warmth, new compassion, influenced by the woman he loved. Together, they dismantled trafficking operations, protected the vulnerable, and created a model that other vampire territories began to adopt. And every night, when their work was done, they returned to the estate that had become a true home. Rosalie had filled it with life and light and love, had turned its stark beauty into something warm. They'd built a greenhouse where she grew flowers that bloomed at night, had installed a library where they spent hours reading together, had created spaces that were theirs alone. Sometimes Rosalie thought about her old life, about the human woman who'd hidden in a cargo crate, terrified and desperate. That woman had been looking for escape, for safety, for any way out of her nightmare. She'd never imagined she'd find not just safety, but purpose, not just escape, but home, not just survival, but love. Valdis had opened that crate and declared her his, and in doing so, he'd given her the power to declare herself as well, to choose her own path, her own future, her own forever. And she'd chosen him. One night, decades after that first meeting, they stood together in the conservatory watching the city lights. Rosalie looked exactly as she had when she'd been turned, frozen in her mid-20s forever. Valdis looked the same as he always had, 300 years of immortality written in his perfect features. But something had changed in both of them. They were softer now, more open, more alive despite being creatures of the night. "Do you ever regret it?" Valdis asked quietly. "Giving up the sun, your human life?" Rosalie leaned against him, feeling his cool strength, his steady presence. "Never. Not once. You gave me more than I gave up. You gave me purpose and power and forever. You gave me love. How could I regret that?" "I worry sometimes," Valdis admitted, "that you'll wake up one night and realize what you sacrificed, that you'll resent me for it." "Then stop worrying," Rosalie said firmly. She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "I chose this. I chose you. And I'd choose it again every single time. You're my forever, Valdis. And I'm yours. Not because you claimed me from a cargo crate, but because we claimed each other. Because we built this life together. That's worth more than all the sunrises in the world." Valdis pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in existence. "I love you," he said, and his voice was full of wonder, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "I will love you for all of eternity." "And I'll love you just as long," Rosalie said, "probably longer, just to be competitive about it." Valdis laughed, a sound that had become common over the years, and kissed her under the glass ceiling of the conservatory, surrounded by night-blooming flowers and the endless dark that was their element now. They'd both been alone for so long, in different ways. Rosalie had been lost, trapped, treated as property. Valdis had been isolated by his power, his control, his inability to feel. But they'd found each other in the most unlikely way, in a shipping container at a dockyard, when one of them was fleeing and the other was reclaiming what had been stolen. And from that strange beginning they'd built something beautiful, something that mattered, something that would last forever. Outside, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, full of life and danger and possibilities. The Safe House network continued to grow, helping hundreds of survivors find their way back to themselves. The vampire court maintained its order, protecting both immortals and humans under Valdis's careful rule. And through it all, Rosalie and Valdis stood together, partners in every sense. She'd hidden in a cargo crate to escape her buyers, and the vampire king had opened it and said, "Mine now." But the truth, the beautiful truth they'd discovered together, was simpler than that. They were each other's. By choice, by love, by the future they'd built together. And that belonging was the freest thing either of them had ever known.